foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Mrcha, Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And I'm going to go through the book of Isaiah, the 14th chapter. It's most of the time, we go into Isaiah 14 and we really hit on specific verses. Okay, but I tried looking it up. There's not really too many breakdowns on Isaiah 14 out there. But nevertheless, it's good to go through these breakdowns, these full chapter breakdowns, like the apostles have been saying. Okay, so nevertheless, let's go through it. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, verse 1. And it reads, right? It reads. It doesn't say, it doesn't talk. It reads. But it says here, "For the Lord Yahweh will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob." Okay, now the Lord Yahweh will have mercy on Jacob. We know Jacob represents the nation of Israel. Okay, it's another name for the children of Israel, or the Israelites. "And will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land," which that land is the land of Israel, which currently, where it's not under our control, right? But when the Lord comes, he's going to set us there. It says, "And the strangers shall be joined with them." Now, the strangers here are referring to Israelites. Okay, these strangers are referring to Israelites, not heathen nations. Okay, but the Israelites, as it says, shall be joined with them. Meaning, like, for example, we at one point were strangers, right? Because at one point we didn't know that we were Israelites, right? We didn't have the true understanding of our heritage of the Lord or any of that. But through the Lord's mercy, as each of us was woken up by the spirit of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, right, we became joined onto already those that were woken up. Okay, so the strangers here are referring to Israelites. It says, "And they shall cleave to the house of Jacob." Okay, which is an example, like I said, is what we're doing now. Verse 2, it says, "And the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord." Now, in verse 2, the context switches a little bit, right? Because now it says, dealing with the pronouns, "And the people shall take them and bring them to their place, colon, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids." So who is the them that is referring to here in verse 2? The them in verse 2 are these other nations. Okay, the house of Israel being the Israelites, starting with the elect. We're going to possess, okay, these heathen nations, starting with Esau, in the land of the Lord, which is the land of Israel. So when the Lord brings us back there, we're going to possess them for servants and handmaids. And that's a part of prophecy. "And they shall take them captives whose captives they were." And we have been captives to all these other nations at one point or another. A quick precept for that is, let me see. Nation hath not had. And Lord willing, I'll try to keep the precepts fairly short and little, because for time's sake, so I can actually get through the actual breakdown. Typically that's what happens. You've got so many precepts, then it drags the lesson on and on and on. But I mean, it's all for edification anyway. I know it's in the book of Maccabees. Give me 1 second. Okay, let's do this. "For what nation had not had a part in let's see, Bible." Yeah, First Maccabees 2 and 10. Let's get that real quick. Maccabees chapter 2, verse 10. Here we go. So this is the book of First Maccabees chapter 2, and I'm going to start at verse 9. Really, verse 8, it says, "Her temple is become as a man without glory, her glorious vessels." Now at this time, this is they consider this the intertestamental period. So between the Old Testament and the New Testament, which is where you have the history of the Greek the Greeks ruling, okay, is recorded mainly in these mainly in the book of Maccabees, right? So how they affected us, and so on and so forth. Then you go to the New Testament, you have the account of the Romans and how life was like being under the Romans. So it says here, her temple, which is the temple, hers referring to us or Jerusalem, right, is become as a man without glory. Her glorious vessels are carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets, her young men with the sword of the enemy. What nation hath not had a part in her kingdom and gotten of her spoils? See, so at one point or another, all these nations have had us as captives. And so, as it says here, we're going to take them captives, whose captives we were. And they shall rule over their oppressors, right? And rightfully so. Okay, this honor have all his saints, right? So we're going to have that honor of being in power and having these other nations under us. We're going to rule over them. Verse 3, it says, and it shall come to pass, so that's a prophecy, right? It shall come to pass in the day that the Lord Yahweh shall give thee rest from thy sorrow and from thy fear and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve. And up till today, we don't have that rest. That rest is going to be in the kingdom of heaven. So with whatever captivity we've been in, we've constantly been in that sorrow, okay, and that fearing for your life, fearing whatever the oppressor could do to you, so on and so forth. And as it says, and from the hard bondage wherein thou was made to serve. So throughout all the different captivities, especially here in Babylon or America, we've been serving in our hard bondage, okay, since we were brought here. So the Lord is going to give us rest from that. And it's going to start with his elect. Verse 4 says that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. Now the king of Babylon, it prophetically, it represents, because who is a king? A king is a ruler of a nation. So the king of Babylon would be whoever is the ruler at the time, which right now is this guy, Biden, for however long he's going to be there for. Whether Trump is going to get back up in there, whether whatever's going to happen. Okay. It says here, and really, I mean, ultimately, we know that the ones really running them are these elites behind the scenes anyway. Okay, so really, they're the ones behind the scenes pulling the strings. It says, and say, how hath the oppressor ceased? Right, because who's a bigger oppressor from a nation standpoint than the U.S.? They go into other countries and they go and oppress them there. As a matter of fact, and when you think of Babylon, it's a nation, but it's sort of like a representation. Like if we were to classify lands and identify them with people, Babylon would be a representation of Esau. Okay, because he uses Babylon to go around, and Babylon meaning America, and do whatever it is that he wants to do to set the example that he wants to dominate certain areas. Okay, now this is the book of Habakkuk. Chapter 2. Let's see, there's one. Let's see. Oppress a man. Yeah, there we go. Micah 2:2. All right, it says here, let me start at 1. Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds, which right now primarily that's who? Esau, Edom. When the morning is light, they practice it behind upon their beds, meaning behind closed doors. So when they have these meetings and so on and so forth, they're devising iniquity. They're putting together these wicked plans behind closed doors. And when the morning is light, they practice it because it is in the power of their hands. So they bring it to light, so to speak, because they have the ability and the power to do so. Verse 2, and they covet fields and take them by violence. So they might just bomb your ass or start a civil war in your country if you have something valuable in there that they want. And houses and take them away, so that they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. Okay, so there you go. And that's because they are the biggest oppressors. So carrying on, back in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 4. So it says that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. Because at one point, this place was the top dog. You couldn't mess with this place. But how are we going to gain that rest from our hard bondage? The Most High is going to take this place down by sending Yahushua. And that's when this place is going to cease. That's when the oppressor is going to become the oppressed. And the oppressed is going to become the oppressor. And the so-called golden city, which represents America or Babylon, is going to fall. It says, the Lord, verse 5, the Lord Yahweh hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. And the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers represents their power, their rulership, their authority. All right, the staff and the scepter is a symbol of authority, of power. And the Lord is going to break that. He's going to break it internally with these disasters, ultimately with Jacob's trouble in World War III, and he's going to break it ultimately when he sends Yahushua back. Verse 6, he who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke. Who is that? Esau. With a continual stroke, right? So he's been smiting and oppressing since he came up into power. He started through deception, gained enough power, and then now with his military might and his ridiculous political control and financial control, he goes around, and as it says, he who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger is persecuted, and none hindereth. Because at the end of the day, what happens is these nations put up. Okay, they put up with Babylon. They put up with Esau, but they don't actually like this devil. See, so when they go down, nobody's going to object. Yeah, in Revelation 18, it talks about how these merchants are going to be standing afar off and, weeping, alas, for this place is destroyed where they were made rich. But at the end of the day, that's only because they've lost their means of making that money that they used to make, not because they actually care about Babylon or Esau. Verse 7, it says, the whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. Yeah, because everything is going to go back to being peaceful again once this devil gets taken out of power. Right now, the earth is mourning. The animals are mourning. The people are mourning. He's destroying the atmosphere. He's destroying the ecosystem. He's destroying the ozone layer. He's destroying the water. You have sharks and whales and dolphins beaching themselves. That's pretty much committing suicide because they don't want to continue to live under those conditions anymore. Oil spills, chemical waste, trash in the ocean. I mean, he's just destroying all forms of life. So when he's taken out, the whole earth is going to be at rest. It's going to become a paradise again. Verse 8, it says, yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Now, let's see. All right, but for time's sake, I might break this up into two parts. Part 1, part 2, for time's sake. But let's see how the spirit goes. So it says, yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Now, a feller is one that cuts down trees. All right, so let's look into the word feller. Okay, it says here, karath, to cut down, cut off, to hew. Right, and when you hew, typically you think of like hewing wood, for example. Okay, so a feller here is one that cuts down trees. And Esau, what they call like deforestation, for example, what they do is since they want to industrialize everything, they'll go in there and show you how much of a devil this guy is and how it affects the ecosystem. Because when you go up into, or when you look at how North America used to be, when Gad and Reuben and the Northern Kingdom was over here, it was a paradise. What I mean by that is it was a beautiful, foresty, but habitable land with different creatures and so on and so forth. But when Esau came here, he started cutting down all them trees, making space, and basically creating a concrete jungle. And what that does is the less trees you have around, because when you look around these cities, those things are not real trees, man. Those things look dead. They look like zombie trees. They don't bear any fruit, but somehow they survive, and they in the winter they're gone, no leaves, and then in the spring they come back, and in the fall they turn brown and they go down. But a lot of these, man, they don't even give you fresh air, and trees are important because they take in the carbon dioxide and then they convert it, they use it, and they give you oxygen. But this devil says, nah, F that. Now, there's nothing wrong with cutting down trees. You need to cut down trees to build, to make space, for the material and so on and so forth. But the thing about this devil is he just takes everything overboard. So this is put an emphasis on how even the trees are going to rejoice when he goes down. Verse 9, hell from beneath is moved to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. Now, in verse 9, and pretty much in verse 10, it's also a metaphorical way of emphasizing how when Esau goes down, everybody's going to rejoice. As a matter of fact, in verse 9, it's pretty much saying that even the grave, because when it says hell is referring to the grave over here, even the grave is excited, to meet Esau, to receive him. So the whole earth is excited to have this devil go out of power, right? As it says, hell from beneath is moved to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee. And when you look up that word, to stir up, it means to excite. Once again, but it's metaphorically put an emphasis on how even the grave and the dead are ready to receive Esau, meaning it's about time for him to go out of power, for him to come down into that low state. It says, even all the chief ones of the earth. So all those different rulers and so-called top dogs of these other nations, it hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. All they shall speak and say unto thee, art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Because see, for example, at one point you had the Egyptians. They were a superpower. And in their time, if you went back in time and you were living maybe during the time of Moses or during the time of Egypt, during the time of when Joseph came up in there and through the famine, they were made great and so on and so forth, you would look at Egypt as, damn, this place is like, how can a kingdom like this ever go down? So, but now you look at the Egyptians, the Mizraim, you're like, who the what? The who? What? Them? They used to rule at one point? So, because they became weak, their time was over, right? You look at Nineveh, right? The Assyrians, the Greeks, like all of them at one point were in high positions, but they all had their time, and now they're not even looked at as what they used to be. Even the Persians, the modern day Iranians. When you go back to the time when they were in rulership, the Achaemenid Empire and so on and so forth, they were a force to be reckoned with. And the same thing is going to happen to Esau. He's going to be brought down and brought low and made weak. And that's why they're saying, art thou become weak as we? Because you at one point were sitting upon the whole world. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked, right? The whore that sitteth upon that dragon, that beast. Verse 11, thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials. The worm is spread under thee, and the worm cover thee, or the worms cover thee. Okay, and when you go into that word pomp, see what it says in the Hebrew. All right, we have here Ga'awan or Gawan. It says exaltation, right? Pride. So pride, arrogance. And why is that? Because they I think in Isaiah 47 it says, "Thou hast said in thy heart, I am a God and none else." Pretty much that's that pride. But that's gonna cease. That's gonna be brought down, as it says, to the grave. Because remember, from verse 9 and 10 on down, it's describing how Esau is gonna go down, but it's also saying in a metaphorical way, right? Because obviously the grave is not going to open up and jump up to grab Esau and pull him in it. Okay, so it says that thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. Because once again, when somebody dies or they're put in the grave, what happens? Eventually their body decomposes, and you have worms that spread out and fill their bodies and so on and so forth, right? That's part of the process of their body decomposing. Okay, but also this represents, on the flip side, going into Esau's infrastructure. Okay, so just like when worms develop in something, you know that thing is broken down. That thing is wasted. Okay, it's decomposing, and that's the same thing metaphorically or representing Esau's infrastructure. Okay, it's also breaking down. All right. Let's see, verse 12. I'll probably end the first part on this verse 12, and Lord willing, I'll do a part 2, just to finish the whole chapter. So verse 12, it says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning?" Which, let me just finish it. It says, "How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" Now, when it says, "How art thou fallen from heaven," this verse is not talking about a spiritual demon, Satan. It's verse 12. It's not even referring to Satan at all. This Lucifer is talking about Esau. Okay, their elites, the so-called illuminary ones, the enlightened ones, the Illuminati, them. And when it says, "How art thou fallen from heaven," this heaven is not referring to the actual spiritual world where the Most High is. Okay, this heaven is referring to their state of rulership or authority or power or dominion. So it's saying here, "How have you fallen?" Because when you read from even a couple verses all the way up on down, it's the same sentiment that's being echoed, right? How is this devil fallen? How is the golden city ceased? How his pomp is going to be brought down to the grave? So it's talking about how Esau is going to go down. He's going to be taken out of power. It says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, from your state of power and dominion and rulership, O Lucifer, son of the morning," which is another way of saying the day dawn, okay, or the which Lucifer means what's that, light bearer? I think in the Hebrew it's a Hayalal. And the scriptures tell you, right, that how does it word it? The children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. Yeah, it's Hayalal, right? It says light bearer, okay, shining one, morning star. So it's all referring to the same thing, and this is referring to Esau, right? These elites, as they refer to themselves as the luminaries or whatever. It says, "How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations?" So when you look at the position that these devils are in, the control and the grasp that they have over the world, and for them to be taken down, right, as it's putting emphasis on it, how? You're the one who owned 3/5 of the world's wealth, who controlled and funded both sides of the war, who run this. The world looks at you, for talking about Babylon, and reports things that are going on here. You spread your cancer on the whole world. So how are you cut down? Who went around dominating everywhere? Somebody says they have gold, you pop up in there and tell them you're going to take a look at it for them. You going up into areas, deposing and taking off their rulers and setting up puppet rulers. So for you to be able to do all of this, how are you falling from your rulership? How did you possibly come down to this lower state? And that's going to be through the spirit and power of Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai. This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, verse 13. All right, and it says here, "For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north." Now, this is dealing with Esau, right? And once again, Esau basically speaking in his pride, which goes into the God complex that he has, right? A couple of precepts, or a precept for this would be the book of 2 Thessalonians, the 2nd chapter. All right, it goes into it describes within the first half. All right, describes pretty much the same thing it's talking about here concerning Esau and his burning desire to be the Most High or to be like God. So as it says, thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, and that's their inward thought. Okay, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. Now the stars of God are the Israelites. Okay, and a precept for this is let's see. I think there might be one in the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter, or maybe my mind is deceiving me, but only one way to find out. Let's see. There we go. This is Daniel chapter 8, verse 9. It says, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great. Now, Daniel the 8th chapter predominantly is going into. It starts off with the wars between the Greeks and the Achaemenid Empire, aka the Persians, and it describes them as using animals, right, or beasts. So it describes the Greeks as the he goat with the horn between its eyes, and then it describes the Achaemenid Empire or the Medo-Persian Empire as the ram with two horns. So after and as you keep on reading, it goes past that a bit and it starts to continue on into the Greek, further into the Greek history, and then it really focuses on Antiochus Epiphanes. He's the little horn here in Daniel, the 8th chapter. Okay, so that's what we're reading of right now. So this is Daniel chapter 8, verse 9. It says, and out of one of them, and this one of them is dealing with, when you read up in the 8th verse, therefore the he goat waxed very great, and when he was strong. So the he goat being the Grecian Empire, it waxed very great, right? They came up into power, I believe, somewhere around 336 BC or so. They conquered in about, being led by Alexander, they conquered in about 12 years or so, all the way from Macedon to the Indus Valley or so. Let's see, Greek or Grecian Empire, and that's a lot of territory to conquer in that span of time. So here's a picture. Let me zoom in on this. There you go. So as you can see here, they conquered a lot, right? They had Macedon, Cyrene, right? Egypt, Kol, Syria, which in the Hebrew is Kal, Syria, meaning all Syria, Asia Minor, all the way up into Mesopotamia, all the way up into the east, all the way up, all the way here, right? The Indus River and so on and so forth, bordering India. So that's why it says that the he goat waxed very great, right? They conquered a lot. And when he was strong, so when they reached the zenith or the epic of their kingdom, the great horn was broken, which the great horn was Alexander, and him being broken meaning he died. And for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven, meaning in his stead, after he died, the next main rulers that took over, which this happened over a period of time because there were different wars between the different generals striving for land and control. But at the end of it, the four notable ones that were left were Ptolemy, which had Egypt. Okay, he had this part Egypt south. He also had parts of Cyprus. You had Seleucus, which had pretty much a large chunk of the east, Mesopotamia, all the way into part of Asia Minor. And then you had Lysimachus, which I believe Lysimachus also had a portion of Asia Minor as well as Thrace and Macedon. And then you had what's this last guy's name? Cassander, right? I believe that was he had here. Now I think Cassander was actually, when you look it up, let's see, four generals of Alexander. I think Cassander actually might have come after. Yeah, so you have here, now they have Ptolemy, Cassander, Seleucus, and Antigonus. Maybe I can pull up this image here. One of these has those that were ruling that region. But as you can see, Ptolemy had the south. You had Seleucus, which had mainly the east, and then in the northwest and southwest, you had Lysimachus and um, Cassander. And I think one of them, either Cassander, I think it was Cassander. His father was the one that reigned before him, and then he came up in there. See if I can find that. Yeah, Antipater. Let's see. Uh, yeah, see, it says here, Antipater was a Macedonian general and statesman under the successive kingship of Philip II of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great. In the wake of the collapse of the Aegean house, or Slakia of the Argead house, his son Cassander would eventually come to rule Macedonia as a king in his own right. So he basically came up in there and took over after his father. But anyway, these are the four generals, right? Not to get distracted. Coming back to Daniel 8. So when it says towards the four, where we at? Towards the four winds of heaven, that's going into the different directions in which they ruled, right? They didn't all rule in one area. Ptolemy would be more south, Seleucus would be more east, and Lysimachus and Cassander would be more west. And it says here, and out of one of them came forth a little horn, and this one was Seleucus. Okay, meaning out of his line came forth a little horn, which is Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes, which waxed, and Antiochus was not the direct son of Seleucus, he was a descendant, which waxed exceeding great. So he came up into power, he got a large army, and he started to conquer and take over. And primarily, he had a capital here, somewhere around this region, known as Antioch. Okay, so it says here, he waxed great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land, which the pleasant land is the land of Israel. So he was conquering these different areas and subjecting the people of those areas under him. And it waxed great, which is Antiochus, even to the host of heaven, which because he became proud, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. So that the sum of the host and of the stars is talking about the Israelites, but more specifically, predominantly the southern kingdom, because at the time of the Grecian Empire, those that were dwelling here were the southern kingdom. The bulk of the northern kingdom at this time had already come to the Americas. So that's why it talks about how he cast down some of the host of the stars to the ground. Okay, and those stars being Israelites. So just a precept to back up the stars being Israelites. And also if you go to the book of Revelation, the 12th chapter, in the first verse it says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And the woman represents Israel, and the 12 stars represent the 12 tribes. And to prove that, we're going to get one more precept in the book of Genesis. See 11 stars. There we go. Genesis 37 and 9. And this is a dream that Joseph had. And it says here, and he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him, and said unto him, what is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee to the earth? So that's going to show you who the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars represented in Joseph's dream. And they were 11 stars because Joseph was the 12th. But we know that in process of time, you had Ephraim and Manasseh come up in there, and ultimately Joseph and Dan, took a back seat. So when you look at the 12 tribes today in Revelation, the 7th chapter, those are the 12 stars here. Okay. So now let's come back to Isaiah 14 and 13. right? So as it says here, continuing where we left off, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, which are the Israelites, meaning that in his mind, he's going to gain the dominion over us. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation, which is also the Israelites, in the sides of the north. And in the sides of the north, when you look into the word sides, it goes into the uttermost part, the extreme parts, outskirts. So this north here is dealing with America, okay, North America. And him sitting upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north is him having us under subjection onto him here. Verse 14, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So that's their thought. That's their the pride of their heart deceiving them. Verse 15, yet. So this is what they're thinking. This is their mindset. But as the scriptures are saying, yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. So hell meaning in two conditions, right? Hell meaning a state of difficulty, okay, of distress, and also hell meaning the grave. So all in all, that's where Esau is going to be brought down. Okay, he's going to lose that position. Remember when we read, or in part 1, it talked about how art thou fallen from heaven, meaning that state of rulership and authority and dominion. So they're going to fall all the way down to hell, to being in a low state, to the sides of the pit. And I think in Isaiah either 20, 24, or one of those chapters, it talks about how we're actually going to put them in pits in the kingdom. Verse 16, they that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee. So when somebody narrowly looks upon you, meaning they're going to look down upon them. And consider thee, saying, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? So it's going to be almost today, right? If you went to Africa, maybe Sudan or somewhere in Africa, and you saw the original inhabitants, or for example, you saw the descendants of, the ancient Egyptians or Ethiopians or so on and so forth, and the way that they're living now, it's almost hard to believe that these were the ones who at one point were the pharaohs and had this rulership over, they were basically the top dogs at one point, right? When you read about ancient Egyptian history and you look at how the descendants are living now, it's like, whoa, right? Like, oh, what? These were the people that were up there doing all this, that, and the third. So similarly, when Esau gets taken down, people are going to look down upon him as though, how did this creature right here, okay, this Lord of the Rings, my precious, that creature, that's what Esau going to be looking like. He's going to say, how did this guy make, the earth tremble and subject everybody under him? Verse 17, that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof. And that's what they're doing, right? They're going around destroying things, conquering everything, and everywhere they go, they want to industrialize it and basically turn the world into a concrete jungle. It says that open not the house of his prisoners, which ultimately, who are his prisoners? His prisoners are the children of Israel, and he has kept us captive under him. All he has done is just changed the scenery of the captivity, but it's still the same. And that's why Yahushua is going to come back and free us from this prison. Verse 18, all the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, everyone in his own house. But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, and as the raiment of those that are slain, thrust through with a sword, that go down to the stones of the pit, as a carcass trodden under feet, right? Meaning that ultimately, when you compare the state that Esau is going to be in, because take, for example, Revelation 20, I believe, right? It talks about how we're going to have all these nations in subjection for 1,000 years. But afterwards, they're gonna go back. They're gonna get their lands back, and they're gonna be subject onto us. But what's gonna happen to Esau Edom, right? He's gonna be completely done away with. That's when the fulfillment of Obadiah 1 and 18. Okay, really the whole of it, but the main part about Esau being exterminated. That's when that's gonna come to pass. in the kingdom. Okay, so his latter state, even in comparison to these other heathens, these other nations, they're going to be in a much better state than this devil, because he's going to get it the worst out of all of these heathens. And as it describes it, it says, "Thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, as the raiment of those that are slain." So imagine, if you went to if you went back in time to the ancient world, and you went there maybe a day after the war. There was a major war, and you went there maybe a day after, and you're walking about and you're seeing the dead bodies of these soldiers and horses and so on and so forth. And you step on somebody's garment, you see the dirt, blood, and all that, like the raiment of those that are slain, right? Thrust through with a sword. So maybe they got some arrows in them. Their helmet is in one place, their arm is in another place. That go down to the stones of the pit, as a carcass trodden under feet. Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land, and slain thy people. The seed of evildoers shall never be renowned. So what's going to ultimately happen is these devils are never going to be put back in any decent position, right? So ultimately, Babylon, for example, is going to be destroyed. Nobody's going to come and inhabit this land anymore. And it tells you that in I think it's Amos, the 9th chapter or so, on down, that we're going to possess Edom, which is going into their land. So their land is going to become ours. So they're not going to have anything, and they're not going to need it, because they ain't going to be here. Now, what's going to happen to their spirits afterwards? Yo no sé. We gotta watch and see. Verse 21, it says, or yo no sé, yo. Verse 21 says, "Prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities." And that's what they're doing now. But this also goes to show you, speaks a little bit about the aspect of reincarnation, right? Because the children are their fathers coming back, like every 3 to 4 generations. And the scriptures tell you that you're not going to escape, right? It's a marvel if a sinner escaped unpunished. You may die in this lifetime, but it does not mean that you've escaped the judgment, because the next time you come, the Lord can get you anyway. Verse 22, "For I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon," which Babylon is modern day America, "the name and remnant and son and nephew, saith the Lord." And that's why this place is going to be utterly destroyed, never to be risen back up again. "I will also make it a possession of the bittern and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts." So what's going to be the besom of destruction? Let's look into the word besom. See what we got on here. It's the mata ta. Interesting. Matata or matata, something along those lines. But it says here broom or besom. Okay, broom or besom. So that's why it says, "I will sweep it with the besom of destruction." It says here, denominator of mud, clay, mire. Okay. Tayat. All right. So the besom of destruction, which is ultimately going to be the fire. All right, the fire. And I say the fire because we know there are going to be 2 main aspects, at least that we know about, that are going to contribute to that fire, and that's going to be the nuclear missiles and the lasers from the chariots, from the Lord and the angels. Okay, and that's what's going to sweep this land, as it says, with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord. So you're just going to see, at least what the elect are going to see, is just that fire just sweeping all across and just burning this land. Verse 24, "The Lord of hosts Yahweh hath sworn, saying, surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass. And as I have purposed, so shall it stand." So what the Lord's decision or his words are, that's what's going to come to pass. And the scriptures tell you that the word of the Lord does not come back to him void. So his and the word of the Lord is in the scriptures. As a matter of fact, we're reading right now about some examples of it. And in here, it's talking about the destruction of this place. So we know it's going to happen, right? As it says, so shall it stand. There's nothing anyone or anything can do to change that. Verse 25, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him underfoot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them, and his burden depart from off their shoulders. And this this Assyrian that is talking about here is really referring to Esau. Okay, because when you read throughout the scriptures, America and sometimes just Esau is referred to as Babylon or Syria or Egypt or Sodom. Okay, I think even Nineveh. But as it says here, I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him underfoot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them. And that yoke represents the burden of captivity. Okay, us being subject under them. Off them is the Israelites. So we're going to be freed from under this devil. And his burden shall depart from off their shoulders. So no longer are we going to have to work and basically be enslaved and be subject to these devils. Verse 26, this is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth. And this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. So this is the Most High's intent. Okay, and this is what he is determined to do. Verse 27, for the Lord of hosts, Yahweh, hath purposed, and who shall disannul it? Right, dude. The Most High has said this. These are the Lord's intentions. Who is going to have the power to undo that, or to change it, or to make it null? Nobody. And his hand is stretched out, and who shall turn it back? In the year that King Ahaz died was this burden. So during that time was when Isaiah received his vision, which is thousands of years ago. Verse 29, rejoice not thou, whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. Yeah, so as it's saying, rejoice thou not, whole Palestina, which is referring to the land over there of Israel. Okay, that east portion over there. And it says, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. So who is it that smote them? Ultimately, it's Esau. But as it's saying here, don't rejoice because Esau is going down, because you about to get, as it says in Ezekiel the 38th chapter, the Lord is going to bring Russia and the northern armies against them. And they're going to completely make that land desolate. And that's what it goes into here when it says, for out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, which a cockatrice, I believe, is a type of serpent or a snake. Let's confirm that. And that's Tazapai or Tazapai. It says poisonous serpent. So out of the serpent's root, which is that hole in the ground, shall come forth a cockatrice, which is that snake. And his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. So this is a metaphorical way of referring to the missile silos and the missiles that are going to come out of them. Okay, likened onto a cockatrice coming out of that root or coming out of that hole in the ground. And his fruit, meaning what's going to come out of it, shall be a fiery flying serpent, which is talking about those nuclear missiles. All right. Verse 30, and the firstborn of the poor shall feed, and the needy shall lie down in safety. So who is the poor and who is the needy? Ultimately, that represents Israel, because that's the state that we are in right now. So as it says, the firstborn of the poor shall feed, and the needy shall lie down in safety, which ultimately represents the Lord is going to take us out of this low state, starting with the elect, okay, and He's going to put us back in a good state. No longer are we going to hunger and thirst and go to our enemies for the want of all things anymore, or be afraid. We're ultimately going to get that rest. And I will kill thy root with famine, and he shall slay thy remnant. Okay, so ultimately, as it says, I will kill thy root with famine, which is one of the plagues that the Most High is going to use to destroy this place. and he shall slay thy remnant, that he is the Most High, shall slay thy remnant. Okay, and how is he going to do that? By means of all the destruction or the destructive means that have been mentioned in the verses above and in other precepts. Verse 31, Howl, O gate, cry, O city, thou whole Palestina art dissolved. See, and that's why it says, rejoice not thou. So don't think that just because Esau or just because Babylon is being destroyed, everything is all good, right? It says, rejoice not, whole Palestina art dissolved. So what's going to cause that land to be dissolved? The nuclear missiles. And who's going to be a predominant catalyst in doing that? For there shall come from the north a smoke, and none shall be alone in his appointed times. And that's referring to the really starting with Russia, okay, and those northern armies. And real quick, let's go to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 38. And I just want to get to the point. Let's see. Yeah, this is Ezekiel 38 and 8. It says, after many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword. So this is talking about Russia. Okay, the Most High basically reviving and putting that warlike spirit back into Russia. And in the latter years, which we're in now, thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel. So they're gonna come against Israel, right? But it also applies to America, because America is also going to be targeted and hit by Russia. It says here, which have been always waste, but it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely, all of them. Thou shalt ascend and come like a storm, right? Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy bands, and many people with thee. And what are the bands? The armies. Okay, so now when you go back to Isaiah 14, as it says here, for there shall come from the north a smoke, which in Ezekiel 38 is referred to as a cloud, what else did a storm, but it's referring to the Russian armies. It says, and none shall be alone in his appointed times. What shall one then answer the messengers of the nation? That the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it. So ultimately, this is the judgment that's going to come. And as it says, not only upon Babylon, okay, but even upon that land of Palestine, okay, or modern day Israel, really that whole region there, okay, which is spoken of in Ezekiel the 38th chapter. As you keep on going, it goes into that. All right. So anyway, that was pretty much it. Yeah, that was pretty much it on Isaiah the 14th chapter. For time's sake, I had to break it up into two parts, but Lord willing, what I'll do is I'll try to put it together in a playlist, and any precepts or any breakdowns in the Isaiah, I'll put those together, and so on and so forth. So if you go to the playlist section, you should be able to find them videos there. But with that, Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha, Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.